Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Today we're excited to talk about the SeaKeeper Ride, and specifically on a jet boat. We're going to be doing an installation today on a 255 FSH. The purpose of this installation video is to show you basically the steps taken to install it. This is really a technical installation. I would recommend highly that you let a professional handle this installation. If you would like to have it done for your boat, let us know. JetBoatPilot is now an authorized SeaKeeper Ride dealer. We are now a certified installer. The question will be, will the SeaKeeper Ride fit your boat? So reach out to us, hit us in the comments below. Be glad to answer those questions for you. Let's jump into it. So let's do an unboxing real quick. When you get your SeaKeeper Ride shipped in, it's going to be one large box. Inside that large box, you're going to get 4 smaller boxes. Ours is the 450 for this particular size boat today. We're installing on a 25-foot Yamaha. So you're going to get 2 boxes they call suitcases that contain your main mounting hardware. There's going to be a box that's going to include your electronics. And there's going to be a larger box like this one that includes your actuators. We also found inside there's this nice little card here with some QR codes on it. One's going to give you access to the Built app. Built app is going to give you the ability to see a 3D model of each step of the install process. We definitely recommend you use that during this installation, and as well as a QR code for additional support, so you can get how-to tips, etc. All at SeaKeeper's website. We've already got one box kind of taken apart for our install. I'm going to show you the box here that has not been opened just yet. So it's packaged well, labeled well. Right away you'll see you've got some larger components here. Cardboard filler on the ends, screws, bolts, nuts. Let's take these little fillers off the end here. Set these guys aside. Take my hardware, I'm going to set that aside. Everything appears to be kind of sandwiched together with some cardboard, so maybe the one in the back comes out first. Yeah, there we go. This is the actuator plate. This is going to be your seal plate. You get a series of shims here. These shims have varying degrees. So you got a 3 degree, another 3 degree, a 4 degree, a 4 degree, and a 5 degree. Actually, looks like there's 2 5 degree. So those are going to be used to help you find your angle. This is your transom plate. This will be part of the blade assembly, looks like. And some hardware in the bag. All right, inside the electronics box, I'm going to try to explain this simply. What we've discovered is that inside the box, you're going to get a distribution module. It's going to look like this. This is what your actuators are going to connect to. This module doesn't have to really be oriented in any one particular orientation, as long as you're not orienting upside down where water's going to puddle. It's going to pretty much be done that way. Essentially, think of this like a connection point for all of your other components to connect in one place, that then get connected through network over to your software module. Now your software module, it's really important to understand that this has to be installed in a very specific way. X and Y needs to be level. Your accelerometers are in here. Imagine the gyro inside, measuring and trying to keep the boat on proper pitch, axis, roll, those sorts of things. It has to be installed a certain way. So make sure during the install that you install it according to the specs. So inside this large heavy box here, you're going to have a couple of actuators. The actuators are identical, so it doesn't matter which one you put on which side. You'll get about 9 foot of cable, so make sure you install this in such a way that you can get this over to the distribution block without having to cut this cable or lengthen this cable, because it's not really going to happen easily if you need to do that. For Yamaha models that have the underwater LEDs installed, you're going to need to remove these, relocate them slightly north. These on the FSH in particular are going to be in the way of the ride system. Before we get started with your installation, I'm showing you a completed install, and I want to show you this now because we want to talk about placement, why we selected this placement for the SeaKeeper Ride on this boat. Now this is a Yamaha FSH, it's a 255 FSH, but the placement is going to be similar for most every other boat. The goal is to locate your SeaKeeper Ride as far outboard as you can without getting outside of some of their parameters. For instance, we don't want to get out past about 1.5 inches of this chine line. This is called a chine. We don't want to get outside about 1.5 inches total distance outside of this line here. We also don't want to get inside about 1.5 inches of the outboard side of the boat here, this outside. So in this case, we're doing well. We're about 1.5 inches here. We're well inside this line. You also want to pay attention to the blade. When it's at max travel, we want to make sure that there's no collision between the top surface here, where the blade connects to the actuators, and the underside of your swim platform. You want to make sure there's plenty of clearance there. So all these things are important when you're making your decision of where to place. On our boat, we placed the SeaKeeper Ride system just to the inside of the ride plate, if you notice right here. Also placed it just above this lower ride surface here, this ride surface here. There was a transition for this chine here, so obviously that's going to be preserved. It's important to talk about the angle of your SeaKeeper Ride relative to this transom wall when you're doing the preparation step to assemble your hardware. When I talk about hardware, we're talking about the transom plate, your shims, your seal plate, actuator plate, those things. It's important that this seal plate, which is what your SeaKeeper blade attaches to, is exactly the same in angle as the ride surface. We want to have it as close as possible to 0 degrees change, with as much variation as possibly -2 degrees up this direction. So you could be within 0 to -2 degrees. In order to get that angle right, so that this mounting matches this ride surface, we use the shims included with the kit. On this particular install, we chose 2 5-degree shims and 1 3-degree shim. You'll see them right here. And that gave us the proper angle, which is roughly 100.5 degrees. On your boat, you're going to want to measure both the port side and the starboard side using an angle finder. You want to make double sure that you are shimming your assembly to match that ride surface. All right, on this step, we're going to assemble our actuator plate, our transom plate assembly. In an earlier step here, we assembled the first just to establish our angles and the shims that we're going to use. We're going to replicate that now for the port side. We found that the easiest way to do this is to lay down the actuator plate, which has got that little rounded feature. And I want to check this ahead of time, make sure there are 12 pre-installed nuts in place. So there's 4 here. You're going to have 4 more here, plus these outer 2, which makes a total of 10. And then you're going to have 2 more, 1 here and 1 here, making a total of 12. Make sure those are all pre-installed before you do this step. If you don't, you got problems. I'm going to lay this on its face so the curved side is down. We now have our 3 shims, what we need now. In this particular install, we have established we need to have 2 5-degree. There's a 5-degree. We have 2 of them, plus a 3-degree shim. Notice how they have these little notches on them? And those notches actually nestle into the shim in front of it, so they kind of index on one another. That last notch here is going to index into, right here on the back side of the actuator plate, there's a notch. So we're going to take this notch and we're going to align it with that notch. All right, next we're going to take our transom plate. We're going to rotate it over and lay it on top. It should align all the components on the inside. It's best if you can align them before you pinch them down. All right. Now we're going to take our long bolt here. It's going to come with a nice little cylindrical threaded fastener here. That's going to go in on the back side. There's also one of these little half cylindrical features here. The bolt's going to pass down through. Now you'll notice you're going to have a couple of different versions of long bolts. So depending on how you do your shims, you may need a longer, you may need a shorter. So you'll choose that once you have actually put your shims in. I'm going to pass our long bolt through. And we want it to come out the other side, but we do not want this bolt to pass outside of this little area here. All right, before we tighten, let's shove this guy up inside here. Now we'll thread it down by hand. You could probably speed this process up by using a drill, but it's not recommended because it is possible that you can do some serious damage here. There's also the question before, should this have Loctite? And the answer is no. Once everything is completely assembled, it's not necessary to add Loctite because this nut cannot free spin, and once this adhesive is on here, this also cannot free spin. All right, we're going to check our alignment one more time before we tighten that down. Make sure everything feels good. Give it one good snug. Now the rest of these parts aren't going to want to flare on us. All right, we are now going to do our final bolt assemblies here across the bottom. Your bolt head and this little half cylindrical fastener here, this little washer of sorts, it's going to go in this little pocketed area. We'll drop it in place. Once that's in place, we'll take the cylindrical fastener. Makes it a nice little recessed place for them to take the Allen wrench. Just thread it in like that. Do it again. Drop your little cylindrical fastener in place. Come in with your Allen wrench. All right, now we're going to grab our torque wrench, 80 inch-pounds. Just rotate till you hear feel it click. Hopefully if you're using a click style wrench. There we go. All right, assembly is ready to go on the boat. The next step before we adhere this to the back of the boat, we're going to be doing a sanding process to the face as well as to the top edge of this bracket, this mounting adapter here. So we've got tape wrapped around all around the sides here, and mainly that's just to help us where we want to prevent the plexus or the adhesive that you're using from sticking to that surface. So that's what that's for. All right, so we've just sanded this face here. If you notice, everything seems to be about flat. You can see the actual fibers in the material now. Previously, we have these tool marks from where it was made in the injection molder. And those tool marks are basically imperfections, and we want to just kind of file down into where we get into the fibers. We want to remove this shiny surface. So as you're sanding down, try to eliminate any of these little markings, tool marks, whatever else you see. When you're done, everything should look a lot like this. Exposed fibers, and you lose all those tool marks. Same thing up on this top lip here. Nice and even. Adhesive's going to stick well to that. Also, one more time, I want to point out the importance of these little standoffs here. We don't want to file those away. Notice how they're still kind of shiny around. We stayed away from those. Those are what is going to give us the spacing necessary to allow the adhesive to build up enough thickness as well as to allow it to cure properly. If these are filed off, there's a good chance the adhesive's not going to cure. All right, so at this step in the game, we've already kind of located both locations, port and starboard. We've got our angles right on the starboard side using the provided adapters and shims. It's important to note that on a lot of boats, the angle, the difference between ride surface and the transom can vary. So you don't want to just trust that because you've got 2 5s and a 3 on the starboard side that it's going to be 2 5s and a 3 on the port side as well. On this one, we went ahead and dry fit it. It's exactly the same, but you still want to take the time to measure those angles and do a good job, because if it's off by more than a degree or so, it could be problems. So just make sure you're doing the same job on both sides. So the next stage of the installation process, we brought the boat outside because we're grinding off this gel coat here just to not make a mess inside the shop. Also, we used a grinding wheel to grind this down to get down to raw fiberglass. It's really not suggested to adhere the SeaKeeper Ride system direct to gel coat. You really want to scuff this down till you get to raw fiberglass. So if you notice, we have blue painter's tape here, kind of taped in place. We've gotten down to really raw fiberglass here. It's good to do this outdoors. Best if you can wear a mask and gloves. Also too, the tape stays on because during the adhesion process, we don't want that adhesive getting onto the gel coat. Once it dries, it's hard to get it off. You really got to kind of grind it off. So just leave the tape on till you're done with that adhesion process. Let's move on to the next step. All right, so now we're installing the actuator and seal plate on our ride system. So in order to do that, first of all, you have to put your actuator inside. You pass the wire through the hole, and now we're going to attach the seal plate on top of the actuator. The seal plate is important because it compresses that actuator. It holds it in place, and it prevents the actuator from rotating. We don't want the actuator rotating. We want a nice, good pinch. In order to get that right, we have to use a torque setting to tighten all the bolts that are attaching the seal plate to the rest of our hardware here. So we're going to have 12 different bolts to attach. You're going to need a 5mm and also a 4mm Allen wrench. An extension would be handy. Also, it's going to be set to a 50 inch-pounds torque setting. We do all these 6 across the top here, and then we'll change over to the 4 on the bottom. So 5 on the top. And it's important to also note, we already did this during the installation, but you want to put some blue, medium blue Loctite on all of these bolts. You do not want these backing off. So do not forget that step. Go liberal with the Loctite. Really helps to ensure that you don't lose these bolts. They are critical. I also asked the question, does it matter where this is situated? As long as this is sitting outside and it's not obstructed, these little brackets here are the ends of your actuators, you're just fine. So there's not really a specific setting that doesn't have to be sitting here or there, just as long as you're free and clear. Kind of, for me, I've got roughly a finger's width in that gap, so that's probably good. All right, next step, we're going to attach our blade to the actuator arms. You're going to need 4 stainless steel bolts that come with the kit, roughly 1 inch long. They have a 13 millimeter head. We're going to use our torque wrench. This is going to be 80 inch-pounds. We've already done most of the hard work here. We'll go ahead and torque these out. Yep. And we are in the down position right now, so you'll notice I've got travel. And when this motor is turned off, you should be able to move this. When it's on, you won't be moving it by hand. All right, so we've completed all of our assembly steps on the outside of the boat. Both port and starboard side are fully installed. We've actually done this yesterday, so our adhesives have cured overnight. We've got all of our bolts and hardware Loctited. We've got motion on our blades here. And we are now ready to move on to the inside steps. Next, we're going to install our distribution block, all of our hardware inside, and then start running wires. All right, at this step, we're going to take our actuator wires and we're going to connect our Deutsch connector to the actual actuator wire here. And there's some really important steps in this process. This is really important to get this right. I've already got the wires kind of flared out so we see the order. These wiring diagram is actually available within the build tab. It's available within the install instructions from SeaKeeper. But I wanted to show you real simply how this lines up in the connector so you see it as a visual. You see I've got the red, the black, the yellow, followed by the green, the purple, and then there's this green with the yellow stripe at the bottom. So in order, when we start putting this together, we've got a 6-pin, actually it's an 8-pin Deutsch connector, but 2 of them are consumed by these 2 little white pins that are already there. Don't mess with those pins. Don't try to take them out. They're going to stay there. They should be clipped in place. But the 6 pins that are remaining, we're going to put in red, black, yellow, and then followed by green and purple, and then followed by that on the bottom. Now, before we go clipping this together, what we want to do first is take our heat shrink. You want to slide this over, and this is going to be done kind of at the end, but you don't want to do this. Don't want to forget this now. All right. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to take our Deutsch connector here. I don't know if you can see it with the camera in the top left-hand corner. There's a number 1. Over on the other side, there's probably a number 3. And so we're going to go in order. Take our red. Red is first. I'm going to grab this little tip here. I'm going to slide it into the number 1 location. Press it all the way in until you feel it click. Once it's clicked and it won't go any further, try to pull back. Make sure that you got a good pass all the way through. Next, we're going to do our black. Pass it in. shove it all the way through, feel the click, try to pull it back. Now we're going to take our yellow, same thing, that number 3 position there, pass it through, all the way through till you feel it click, pull it back. Next, just to make things easy on you, we're going to do our green one. It's actually easier to do the purple one first because it's just easier, but we're going to do this in order so it's not confusing. The green here, I'm going to pass that through. There it is, it clicked. Next, we're going to take our purple, pass that through. This is just a little bit thinner gauge wire, so it's a little bit harder to manage when the other wires are in the way. So it may be easier for you to put that in first. Pass that all the way through. There we go. Pull back. That's good. And then the last one here, this kind of green with the yellow stripe, put that in on the bottom. That last position right there. Pass that all the way through. And pull back. Good. So now that we've got that done, I'm going to take this red section here, we're going to press this down. I'm going to make sure it clips all the way down. There it is. I'm going to look for all those pins to be visible. They didn't get shoved back out when we slid that down, so it's nice and locked in place. All right, once that's done, I'm going to grab our housing here, this little shroud. This is going to go up and over the side. And there's actually a little notch it's going to align. Locking this in place. Make sure it's clipped, all the wires are inside. A little twist is helpful. There we go there. And we've got a good assembly. All the wires are passing through, everything's clipped together. All right, last step. We're going to get our heat shrink. I want to make sure this heat shrink does not come out here. We don't want to leave these wires exposed, so when we do our heat shrink step, make sure that there's no wires peeking out the bottom. Get you a heat gun. This cable we've got marked with a piece of blue tape that says P on it. Helps us to identify that this is indeed the port side actuator cable. It's important too to note, see the glue coming out the bottom of the heat shrink there? No, we've got a good flow there. This is not only a heat shrink, but it has an adhesive to keep it from moving around. All right, looks like a good assembly. Now we're ready to plug this in to the bottom of the distribution block. So when we clip this actuator plug in place, it's not necessarily super important to place the port side on the port side and the starboard on the starboard side. It can go either way. It just, when they commission the system, whenever the system is actually commissioned, it will have to be understood which one's port, which one's starboard, and then they can properly set it up in the computer. All right, let's clip it in place. This little tab here is going to be facing me. We're going to come in underneath. All right, so we've run power now into our battery compartment, and we've installed a circuit breaker that's going to run the red wire over to this bus that's actually connected to the start battery bus, and then the ground wire we ran over here to the start battery here on the battery itself. So this way, when we switch the power switches to the off position, we'll actually be turning off power to the actuators. This is really important. When you mount this box, this is going to need to be mounted with the SeaKeeper logo as level as possible, both this way and also this way. And these cables coming out pointing towards the bow or towards the stern. You never want to point it this way or this way. So ideally, you want to be able to read the text, make sure it's level on both axes, X and Y. Also, it's important to note that when you're doing your installation, there are going to be different types of screens on boats, Garmin's, Lowrance, Simrad, etc. And inside of this little panel here, you may have to have that selector chosen to select your specific MFD. So your installer is going to need to know that. If you're doing the install yourself, check with the install instructions before you get finished with your install in that part. So wiring is now complete inside of our helm compartment. I want to go over some details about where the wires come from and where they go to. For starters, let's talk about our backbones. We mounted them over on the starboard side wall inside the helm area. We have power wires coming off of the NMEA backbones. They run up here and we've zip tied them and they go into accessories 1 and 2. So while we're operational, we have to run our switches in the on position. We run our ground cables over to our fuse block. We have our cable coming from the distribution module all the way underneath here. It's going to be passing up and around. You'll see where I'm kind of jiggling the cable now. That's connecting to the back of the private network backbone. We have our cables coming from the back of our Simrad. The first is going to be the Simrad connection that goes down to the public network. The second one is the Ethernet, which is going to run down. It goes all the way down to the Ethernet portion of our software module. We also have an SK, little bit of text here on the software module that says SK, and that's going to be running up and over. Follow with my finger here. That runs on the bottom side there of the private network. And then the one that says NMEA, and that cable will follow around to here. It's wound up, and then it follows its way up to the bottom side of the public network. And then we have one more cable. That's going to be the one here, and that follows its way up and around over here and all the way up to our keypad, which was wired as an accessory on this installation. It's optional. And that's the complete wiring for the SeaKeeper Ride. All right, well, this completes the installation for the SeaKeeper Ride on the Yamaha 255 FSH. Now, it's important to mention this does not include the commissioning step. We will do that in a later video. It also bears mentioning that anything we did on the starboard side, you pretty much want to duplicate those steps over on the port side. On our video, we were not able to show both sides being installed for time purposes, but obviously duplicate both steps on both sides. As mentioned previously, if you're interested in a SeaKeeper Ride for your boat, you can find the link to the product in the description below. If you've got questions, just comment. We'll be glad to answer those questions for you. JetBoatPilot is an authorized SeaKeeper Ride dealer as well as installer. As always, we appreciate you watching this video. And if this was helpful to you, check this one out.